Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Bart Klicka, the Chief Research and Strategy Officer here at Prevent Child Abuse America. I'm here for another installment of a research review. This month, we're looking at some research that just came out from a group of studies that's been part of a working group at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for the past number of years, looking at issues related to the intergenerational patterns of child abuse and neglect and factors that may actually interrupt this cycle. A few years back, there was a study panel put together to look at the role of safe, stable, nurturing relationships in breaking intergenerational patterns of child maltreatment. That is, kids who are maltreated who then go on to maltreat their children. I provided a link to that special issue, but the gist of the special issue is that across different studies, there was evidence that safe, stable, nurturing relationships buffered or interrupted this intergenerational pattern of child abuse and neglect. So the most recent working panel included the same studies that were included in the previous panel, but looked at this issue of intergenerational patterns of child abuse and neglect and whether or not they could isolate some environmental factors or safe, stable, nurturing environmental factors that might interrupt this link. And they used data from the Rochester Intergenerational Study, the Family Transitions Project, the Environmental Risk Longitudinal Twins Study out of the UK, and the Lehigh Longitudinal Study. The Lehigh study was not included in the publication of the American Journal of Public Health. It was published elsewhere, and so I won't review it today. So the first study was from the Rochester folks, and what they were interested in looking at is whether kids who are maltreated go on to have financial difficulties in adulthood. And they wanted to test whether or not they could find potential reasons why child maltreatment may lead to eventual financial strain. So they did what they call a developmental cascade model, and developmental cascades merely suggest that child maltreatment puts children on a potential course whereby their development is disrupted across the developmental continuum, leading ultimately to negative consequences. And what they found in this study was that, lo and behold, all different forms of child maltreatment were associated with financial strain, known risk factor for child maltreatment perpetration. And they started to find evidence for this developmental cascade that child maltreatment puts children on a track where they have increased risk for things like depressive symptoms and substance abuse, which then have implications moving forward into adulthood. The next study is by Schofield and colleagues, and this comes from the Family Transitions Project from North Central Iowa. And in their study, they looked at what they call the intergenerational continuity of adverse childhood experiences, and they found evidence of this link. That is, children of parents who experience ACEs were more likely to also experience ACEs. And they also found evidence that this intergenerational pattern was interrupted by things like social cohesion or exacerbated by things such as alcohol vendor density in the community. And then finally, the Jaffe study comes from the Environmental Risk Longitudinal Twins Study out of the UK. And they were looking at the association between child maltreatment and poor economic and educational outcomes. And what they found is that maltreated youth were nearly 2 times as likely of having poor educational qualifications and not being in education, employment, or training at the age of 18 compared to their non-maltreated counterparts. And they also found some evidence that a supportive adult in their life those with a supportive adult in their life had better educational outcomes than those who did not have a supportive adult in their life. Here's the links to the actual studies that were included in the research review this month. I think all of these studies begin to provide some evidence of safe, stable, nurturing environmental characteristics that help us think about maybe some targets for our prevention efforts. If you have suggestions for future research reviews, please feel free to contact me at the email address on the screen. Thanks for listening.